Hi gang! There's been some big changes at Portland Labs as we look for ways of spending more of our time focusing on the core. Moving forward, we're going to change the format of Totally Random up a bit. It took more time than you probably imagined to produce the show the way it was before, and I'm not sure its kind of informality was appropriate for where Concrete 5 has grown to today. In the future, what we're going to do is release these videos when we have some useful how-to content, shorter kind of instructional videos, and when we have some big news that we want to share. We do have some big news today. We are starting to rebuild concrete5.org with a brand new skin and a whole bunch of feature improvements at the beginning of May. Andy just brought a new person into the world, so we sent him away from the office for a month or so and told him to work on 5.7 in what free time that he had. I know most of you have already seen the front-end editing experience around Concrete 5.7. We've been working on it for what seems like forever. But what we haven't shown a lot of is some of the deep code changes that are happening underneath the hood. So we had a meeting on Friday to review all that. We just hit record, and here's just a sneak peek of some of the pretty big changes that are going on inside of 5.7. I hope that they get you as excited as we are.
No, I feel like that this is the perfect. I mean, all of the various. This feels to me like as big a change as Concrete 5 was from Concrete 4, honestly. Like, I mean, certainly in terms of under the hood stuff.
Well, then let's pop her open and see what you're running in there.
All right. Just some of the less exciting stuff first. Although, I mean, it's been in development for so long. It's funny to think of the stuff that people that is not in 5.6, but that we've been staring at for years at this point. We have rewritten a large chunk of the JavaScript that powers this stuff. A lot of the changes here were not just because it's the right thing to do. They had to actually come because they would get us something in return, and I think that's a pragmatic way to go. And when we were doing stuff like getting these drag and drop blocks and these panels and all of this stuff, bolting that on to the existing JavaScript was sort of untenable. So we kind of rewrote a large way of how we deal with almost everything, like the search interfaces for like the file manager, the way that we actually pick stuff from the file manager. It all works pretty much the same way to the end user, although it looks prettier. But it's been rewritten, which is nice. Not every JavaScript thing is rewritten, but it will get us a lot more love in the JavaScript community.
What version of jQuery are we working off of?
We are currently working off of, I think, 1.9 something. Yeah, 1.9.1 currently. It will probably go to whatever is the latest state of 1.9 at when we do a release.
They still have the version 1 updating. I think they're like 11 now.
Or 1, yeah, 1. Whatever latest version of 1 is, not version 2. And we're swapping out some JavaScript libraries underneath the hood, like our own crappy sitemap JavaScript with the tree-based stuff that we also use for group trees and for other projects. And just a lot of nice stuff there, which I don't know that we're necessarily everyone in this room is going to come into contact with all the time, but I think people who work with the core will probably appreciate that.
Yeah.
And it will also, it just looks nicer it just looks nicer. And we also have something that we talked about a while ago, which is the new assets system. Oh, is my computer going to crash for some random reason? It's pretty awesome. Oh, what is happening? Hello. Okay. Just doing stuff, just transmitting personal data to some computer school. Don't even worry about it. So we talked about this months ago. This is a new system for registering JavaScript and CSS sort of groups and making stuff come in the right order and what require other stuff. And this is really our answer to the Miser thread on concrete5.org. this system will let developers, rather than just saying, I want to add the sitemap.js to my header or footer, this
Okay.
yeah. Really, the only thing that we let you do right now is we were smart enough not to include the exact same file twice. But that's really the only thing that unless you put it in the header and the footer, in which case we probably stuck it in both spots. So it was pretty brain dead. It worked for a while, but this is much smarter. I've gotten rid of the wait, which we had talked about, months ago. Instead, you just kind of whatever order you define the stuff, it will always honor that order for your own particular grouping of assets. And this is just a way to, instead of adding sitemap.css, sitemap.js, and dynatree.js, and anytime you want to use the sitemap, you can just one line of code saying, give me all the assets in this request for this request uses the sitemap, so give me all the assets that make that work. And then this system takes care of making sure that nothing is included twice, putting stuff in the header or footer. Anything that can be post-processed, if you've got that turned on, it will minify and combine that stuff for you to make it faster. And it's just a really nice way of doing stuff. Moreover, themes can mark certain... Themes can say that they ship with certain capabilities. So Bootstrap will say, yo, I've already got your error handling and stuff included in my CSS, so you don't need to include that anymore. So, for example, if I go into Contact Us and hit Submit, I've got this, admittedly not the most beautiful sort of core styling of this error box, but Bootstrap already has this in place. So if I were to add a form in my Bootstrap theme, the little CSS file that's being included for this would not be included in the site because it's already being told that the Bootstrap theme handles that. And as we continue to do that stuff, that will be a lot nicer. Sort of like marking things for their capabilities and not having to do a lot of namespacing of CSS and all that kind of annoying stuff. So that is in there. That will give people some stuff to play with. It solves other problems too, like how to make sure that this will handle versioning of certain files. If you, I don't think I have any examples of that in here, but certain assets can actually override other assets based on versions and things like that, and we'll document all that stuff and things like that. This is really meant to be a full solution for making our themes, documenting our themes and making sure that they all work together with blocks and look nice with the core, and also giving third-party folks the ability to kind of, not, have a little more control over the stuff that they ship and reuse libraries, and know that, if you include Fancy Box, if 3 add-ons have Fancy Box, you're not going to get 3 different versions of fancybox.js polluting the header of your site and then breaking. So it's meant to kind of bundle all that stuff up together and work pretty nice. We have authentication types, which appears to be broken, but I think that's my fault. Oh, I guess it's in the systems and settings stuff. We've been working with an internal branch that has this stuff for a while, so but we wanted this forever. It was basically the ability to add Facebook authentication, Twitter authentication, anything like that into the core and have it automatically update the login page without having to, the people have hacked around solutions to this stuff, and they've made blocks that you put on the front page that link to their own single page. It's kind of a mess. So we've got one authentication framework that I wrote up years ago, and Corvin implemented this past year, and that works pretty well. I think we're going to ship with Facebook, not enabled, but available in the core to turn on. We'll probably turn some of that stuff on for our own offerings. It'll be nice. And that's awesome. And so as we go let's go a little bit deeper. So this is one of the few big changes. the reason for this, when it came time to start doing some of this stuff, these panels where panels have to talk to each other, and you've got all these new views over here that have all this logic in them, and stuff like, you know, what's a good example? Like this versions panel has all this kind of logic in it. It's got all this data. It was clear in the past we would have done this with a tool script, and anyone watching this video, a tool script in Concrete 5 is basically just been a way to have like a chromeless view, you know, and chromeless being a view that's not in your site, doesn't have a toolbar on the top. It's basically a way to do a view in Concrete 5 and include it through an AJAX request, which is what all these things are. This would be a tool script, you know, this would be a different thing. And that's served us well for many years. But as I started going down that path, that was a lot of code that was being bolted onto a lot of other code, and there was no separation between that stuff, and it was just pretty disheartening. So one of the main new developer features in 5.7 is a much better model view controller system, which is not really that different in its implementation. Well, it's not really that different in sort of its concepts from the existing Concrete 5 stuff, but it works a lot better. So, for example, in the past, if you clicked on this would load up something like tools/pages/panels, or tools/panels/page, and that would give you a PHP script that would do this stuff, and that would work. But instead, what we have now is a much nicer approach. We first define a route for it. Where is it? Panels. Where are you? So we first define a route. So anytime you go to /system/panel/page, now I fully realize that this basically makes any URL in your site that starts with system off limits, and that's probably we might want to change that to Concrete 5 or something else. /panel/page, it's gonna run this particular controller method, and so we've got this panel controller/page in here, and then that will serve up a particular view that you've got defined over here. So unlike tool scripts of yesteryear, although those all do still work, because of backward compatibility and because we're not ever going to, or we're not going to be getting rid of those existing ones anytime soon because there's a lot of work there. Unlike those tool scripts of yesteryear, it doesn't just work automatically. You have to define all this stuff, but you do have a lot of flexibility in terms of how you define all your different methods. All the single page controllers and page controller stuff, all that stuff still works. This is like an additional system that lets you use Concrete 5 as if it were a real like traditional model view controller framework, which I think will make developers very happy with. And it gives us a lot of separation between this stuff. So all these panel views are, very, they're all just, it's, your standard Concrete 5 stuff. There's no template language or any of that stuff. But it does, the controllers do pass data into these views, and it works very nice.
So that's really cool. We're not coupled to the view method at all anymore?
There is, so yes and no. The view, if we actually look at this stuff, there is, I think what Corvin's asking about is there is a view class in Concrete 5 that was meant to always be this kind of generic view for viewing something. Like, this is the thing that renders out to a browser. But it quickly became very much wedded to rendering a page. And that's really all that you could do with it. And it had theme stuff in there and all this jazz. So now there are much lighter weight view classes that these things extend. Like, so there's a view abstract class, and there's a view class, which is actually the thing that is mapped to a page, and the or actually a thing that is mapped to a theme. So when you actually go to install Concrete 5, that is a view that is mapped to a particular theme. And then there's a page view that bolts on top of that. There's a much clearer object-oriented sort of class hierarchy there than there used to be. And most of it is backward compatible in the code. Not that people are interacting with that stuff too much, but it was written in a way so that it wasn't just completely killing off all the old API. It's just it was refactored more than rewritten entirely. All those things use underneath the hood some Symfony components. So there is a routing component that gets built in here. There's this HTTP kernel component, which is a fancy way of saying look through the URL and figure out what URL I'm requesting. There's a request object in here, and those are all just pretty nice. It's just a nice way of those are nice full-featured API libraries for dealing with stuff that we don't want to write, but they still make a lot of sense. And there are Concrete 5 libraries on top of them. There are Concrete 5 libraries on top of them that give them kind of the kind of API that people who use Concrete 5 know and understand, and should work pretty well. And so there's more stuff on that. Not a lot has been thought of as to how this could be useful for non-core stuff, although it obviously would be. It's just we haven't put in any effort into figuring out how end developers could use that same MVC stuff, but I don't imagine that would be that difficult to do. It would just be something to add in.
Question, you have open in that file.
Yes.
You have a view method. Is there anything still in the core that automatically routes to the view method, or are we only going off the routes?
Yes, there is. So all of these new yes and no. So everything in this file is all kind of system level stuff for new things like panels and dialogues and stuff like that. But there are certain things that do route sort of in the magical way, the traditional and this all works. This is all very manual. So you define a route to a controller. That controller can return a closure, or it could it could render something itself. It could return a path to a view. That's very traditional MVC. Then there are tools which still work. That is, all this stuff actually does work through the routing system, though. So you can see down here, where's tools? Tools legacy. So you can see that this stuff all actually routes through a controller in the traditional we're using the new system to maintain the backward compatibility. And then down here, we've got page routes, which do work the same way you're used to. So anytime you go to dashboard page, that runs view automatically. You don't have to define that behavior. We're not going to change that behavior.
Right.
So basically, page controller stuff works same way it always has. Tools is legacy, but works the same way it always has. And this new view stuff is explicit. You have to handle that explicitly. It's mostly... I don't expect people to use Concrete 5 to build some kind of MVC application, but as we were adding on all of these different interfaces that had to talk to each other and share all this data, like the idea of adding tool scripts and adding to that bloated process.php that handles this like the poor man's MVC from 12 years ago or like 11 years ago, like it was just kind of harrowing. Like this is a much nicer way of doing stuff. And I think as people look into how these views and controllers work, they'll see how this new stuff works alongside the old stuff. But But yeah, so pages and tools work as they currently do, and you don't have to define routes for those. It's just this new stuff that uses that. And all these new interfaces will continue to use that. I don't expect that to change. But I don't expect the page level MVC to change either.
Yeah, I just imagine like a situation for dashboard single page where you have the edit and the view and the search, and this will all be a single controller that just has two different methods, and that's how you do it in like, say, more traditional.
Yeah. There's probably some additional thinking that could be useful here. The idea of like this new stuff is very powerful, but it requires more futzing than Concrete 5 has required in the past. So a middle ground between like, okay, now you have to add like every method you want a dashboard single page to do, you got to add that to this. Like, oh god, like I don't want to do that.
Yeah,
but
we kind of have like the whole page that you could create through this interface, like the add page
yes.
workflow. Then we have the single page stuff, which is a more traditional, like non-CMS style.
Yes.
So it seems like in the past we had tried to route everything through the whole dashboard thing and then kind of back into the system that what we have today, sort of.
Yes. Like for example, people have asked in the past, like, what if I want to make an API for stuff in Concrete 5, like which we do for TopCon or which we've done many times. Like, how do I do that? It's like, well, there are ways to do that. Like we use tool scripts today because that gets you Concrete 5, but it doesn't render a page there, and that totally works. But it doesn't give you any kind of MVC, and so there's no way to say like, okay, you can fake it but then you're including elements and your loader methods and all this stuff, and it's just like, oh, this kind of sucks. And then you could make a single page that had no view, and that would work too, and that would give you your site /API. That's a single page, but that's always felt kind of lame because it's not a page in your site. It shouldn't show up in the sitemap. It's like a service that is programmatical, so you should be able to make a roots file that works with it, and this would, and anytime someone goes to that resource, you can map to that controller and render different views based on, and like this will allow you to do that kind of stuff. So I think it will add in some flexibility that we needed in order to make some of these new interfaces work, but not, and just to make our code base look less long in the tooth, honestly. Like, it's a lot nicer. And continuing on, honestly, I don't remember why. I mean, I think I do know why I went down this deep dark hole of that I'm emerging from. When we decided that this was going to be 5.3, I thought that was cool because it got us certain things like late static binding, which is very nice, and some enterprising souls can take it upon themselves to clean up so much of Concrete 5's core to use that, since we rely on that type of pattern, but PHP has never been able to fully support it, so we've had to bend over backwards to make our own, to get to fake it. So we could actually clean up so much code that I'm not going to worry about now, but some developers could certainly help us clean up so many classes. Spring cleaning, exactly. Yeah, I know. So that was one reason why it was exciting, and we needed that late static binding. Really, the reason that I wanted to go 5.3, apart from the long talks in our office, was we needed it for what we did with the tree classes that we've used for the user groups and for other add-ons that use this tree framework. That stuff was very heavily PHP 5.3, and we wanted to include it in the core, and that was going to be the best way to do it. And then, PHP 5.3 also gives us namespaces, and I hadn't really thought about going that route because it was going to be a massive undertaking, and it was going to, break stuff for people. But it's not insurmountable breakage. It's just like it would require a developer to clean up the stuff they've got. But as we've continued to work on this, and as the time has gone on, it became clear that this was going to be more of a migration and less of an in-place upgrade. It felt like we're not going to get another chance to do this, and we can't do 5.8. I mean, at this point, I don't want to say we'll ever do 5.8. But moreover, we couldn't do 5.8 and say that again is going to be another upgrade from which we can't do a migrate.
Yeah, we should definitely not abandon people every version.
Yes, no, and that's
so often.
It's a foolish thing to do business-wise and just in general.
No,
so, yeah. So, I mean, obviously, I'd rather not have to abandon people at all. But since we have decided that certain architectural changes are going to make it so that it's more of a migration script and less of a knowledgeable developer and less of a drag it onto stuff and all your old packages still work, I thought that it was time to sort of just pull the Band-Aid off. So most of the core at this point is fully namespaced. There is this, a lot of it will probably look pretty similar. One thing this gets us is in 5.6 we introduced we had the concrete directory, which had models and libraries, and those were all just stubbed out empty classes. And then we had the core directory that were the real classes, and that let you actually extend from a blank class and add your own methods in there. And fortunately, with namespacing, you can actually do some fun stuff that makes that completely unnecessary. So I killed all those empty classes, which is awesome. So if you actually go into the concrete directory and go into blocks and go into content and go into controller, you actually get the friggin' controller, which is awesome, and not an empty controller. Back the way it used to be. All this stuff will probably look pretty similar, with the exception of the core directory, which now actually has the contents of the models and libraries directory. That was a weird distinction that I think I honestly made 8 years ago because we wanted Concrete 5 to be more of an MVC framework, and I thought, well, hell, let's have a models directory. That'll make it an MVC framework. So instead, the core directory is actually a directory that just contains the namespace versions of all of the different functionality that we have in the site based on class. So it's a much saner way of doing it. If you go into core and go into area, you can see there's area, global area, layout, column, custom column, all this stuff. They're not models anymore. If you go into this, you can see namespace, concrete, core, area, class area, all this stuff. Making this stuff work with namespace is actually kind of a nightmare, but it is mostly done at this point. Because since all of these files are namespaced, all the stuff we use within these files, you have to sort of import into this stuff. So a lot of this has been just running through tests and installing it and finding where it breaks and adding a line here and trying again. But fortunately, as you can see here, that's 99% done. And all of these things can still be overridden in the directory above, and they can actually, and since this is namespace, you can actually just extend the namespace version with your own version, and that all works really well. This is actually following a standard that the PHP Framework Interoperability Group put forth called PSR-4, which is basically a way of saying anything in here that you any class in here that you have, like all the way down here, all the directories up to that point, or all the namespaces, like match the directories, and then the class name matches the file. Like super basic, but makes your code look clean, and I think it will make people happy. I know there are still underscores in here. It's actually modified we'll call it the Concrete 5 PSR-4 format, because if you actually go into here, you can see there's core area layout is still the name of the handle of the block, but we camel case the namespace in there, which because namespaces look nicer when they're camel case. Now, as part of the standard, they explicitly say you're not supposed to do that. So maybe it doesn't follow the standard if you explicitly disregard portion of the standard.
I think the idea of it is that you would name your directory that camel case thing.
Yes, which I totally have in the core. Yeah.
You have to make sure that they're always the same capitals.
Yes, you do, and so I don't know that we need to say that we are compatible with that. But there is one thing that this does let us do is there's no longer any. You no longer have to do loader model or loader library in your code. You never really had to do that in 5.6, or you didn't have to too much. But you did have to sort of set up your own auto loading, which sucked. And so now that all the auto loading happens automatically based on a custom class loader that extends a Symfony class loader based on that framework. So it's really nice. A lot of this stuff is just like nerd porn at this point. But
so with that, you said we still support overrides and all that nerd porn.
Yes. No, it's a good question.
Are we using a file-based inversion control?
No, we are doing our own excitement at the moment that I've actually turned off because it is. You can tell it's actually fairly slow, so I've turned it off. We'll figure out a way to make it fast and make it work. But the idea being that if you wanted to, anytime a class is kind of derived from its, okay, so there's a couple different ways of doing this. So if I go into config and I go into class aliases, you can see here's some concrete 5 classes and the namespaces that they map to. So if we've got if you use page in your code, much like people do, it will map into the core page class. And you'll notice that we don't have concrete, which is the sort of first level of the namespace in there. We have the second one. Because what it does is the class loader will check the root level to see if there is an application core page class in there. And if it is, it will use that one. Otherwise, it will use the concrete one that exists in the core directory.
So it's specific to that application namespace?
Yes. And you could change that if you modify a config value, but yeah, or they aren't actually in a directory called application. You could I think they're in a directory called I don't know that we have decided on whether it's going to be a directory called core or classes or whatever that lives in here. That's the other yeah, so right, and then you make that class extend the other one. And we haven't really done too much with the inversion of control stuff. I looked into that when doing this, but I would be interested in continuing to look at it, but we've kind of gone our own way a little bit that works with existing stuff.
Pretty close. Like, you could call what you just described inversion of
No,
control.
perfect. Then we do that.
It's inversion of control, the actual, the idea is pretty loose.
Okay, see, whatever I looked at, I was like, well, this is like injecting parameters into methods, and I was like, it's not really what we're doing.
Basically, the idea is that you allow the calling class, whatever's creating it, to provide the actual interface.
Oh, well, then that is essentially what we're doing.
So, what we're doing here is just, it seems like it's on the auto load. If there's an override, we load that override.
Yes.
And that override can just include itself.
Yes, extend itself, which is that, and there are some amazingly enough, there are also some unit tests that verify that this works. I know, because yeah, I know. There's a class loader unit test because it's starting to do this. You can imagine this was kind of a nightmare undertaking without some kind of testing. So that will be something that our community will probably like.
So do we think please correct me if
Yes.
is there value in making the overrides all contained within an actual directory at the same level as core? The reason I ask is it's difficult to explain overrides to people to begin with, and it's not made any easier by the fact that the core exists within the same directory structure as the override.
So you're thinking of, so we're in the web root right now with the concrete directory. You're thinking of moving blocks and controllers and elements and all those empty directories we got to like a
override,
overrides or application or
application.
yeah, that
for your site.
If we want to do that, we should do it now. And
I think it would make it a lot easier to explain it to people rather than just saying, well, copy everything up and then down a level, except for the core, because that's part of it.
And you have to name it application, even though there's no directory that says application. I think.
All of your overrides in one directory and core in another, and that clean up your root install.
Yes.
So we wouldn't get the people on.
It would.
There's too many directories in Concrete 5. That would be nice.
Yeah, you basically have a concrete directory, an application directory, and then a packages directory and an updates directory. I mean, that kind of makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense.
It does make a lot of sense.
So,
That does make a lot of sense.
is there? Well, there's obviously no support for package core overrides. But is that something that we would want to package core?
Like to ship an override for the core in a package.
Right. So you want to. So
We had that, or we there is a way to do that in 5.6 that we don't talk about. But we needed it, so we added it.
Yeah, well, so like,
Called override core by package, amazingly enough. But it
wouldn't be, it would be,
it's not
it wouldn't be a
great.
plug-and-play sort of thing to allow that, but it would be cool to functionality.
Yeah.
I think we do. I mean, it's always a performance balance because we do actually allow that for block templates. Like we've allowed it forever. Like it's just but it's literally anytime we render a custom template on a block, we traverse all the packages and find it basically. So on demand, and I think we've figured out a way to intelligently caching it at this point. But
that register type thing.
Yeah.
Well,
Be
yeah.
effective for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's how, inversion control
Yeah.
implementations in PHP generally work, where they have like a coordinator that's usually called app or something like that. Where
Yeah.
you register your overrides.
Yeah.
So like you have a user's type, and then you would give it either the class name and the namespace, or you give it a function called total that will generate it and return it.
Yeah.
So that anytime you wanted to create a user's object, you would do, app
Yeah.
create user.
And that's kind of what we do with the helpers. That's one reason why helpers are so easy to like. That was a pretty easy thing for me to move around because there's one function that is responsible for figuring out where to load this class from. So, yeah, I think there's some benefit into looking into that. I don't think anything that we've done is going to make that harder to do.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like it.
It's going to make it easier to do.
This is a huge step.
Yeah, no, it is, and like I like the app having an overrides directory at the same level as concrete and packages. That's gonna look, yeah, it's gonna look great. And then the last big thing, I mean, there's lots of stuff in here. The last big thing, this was also somewhat nutty, and I don't. This came about, I think, because of a conversation I was having with Corvin and Mike, and just the idea that when are we gonna, ADODB is a fine library for 7 years ago when we chose it, and we were always ahead of the curve in terms of from the get-go using a library that had, placeholders for SQL and SQL injection, support and all this stuff. But ADODB, the library, is a bit limiting. I mean, it certainly works for database stuff, and we like it for database stuff, but developers have been grumbling forever about some of its ungraceful, it's a code base that's not really maintained anymore and is, PHP 4 primarily, with some, it doesn't break in PHP 5. But
Well, never really got us plug and play database abstraction.
no, so yeah, and it's hard to imagine it being unmaintained. That's it's not going to get better, exactly. And I was looking.
We're just going to use flat files.
No, yeah, exactly. We're going to use SQLite, and we've rewritten it, and we're just doing direct calls to the API methods. No,
Every individual browser session gets its own SQLite database. Get around that whole
So instead of ADODB, all this stuff is now running off of a different database abstraction layer that is based off of a PHP project called Doctrine, which will probably make Corbin happy because
I feel like a kid.
you get an abstraction layer, and you get an abstraction layer.
Yeah, like this extended family who's all trying to impress me, and it's like the build up. I'm like, it's getting better and better.
And so there is a Concrete 5 database layer that extends all that stuff. And that involved writing a parser for Concrete 5, those ADO XML. Like, all that stuff still works. It actually only took a few hours, amazingly enough. But it basically sniffing those XMLs, and it's pretty ugly. It's really slow, which we need to fix, but it works. Not the layer itself, but the parsing of the XML. It seems to take 3 times as long to install the block types for some reason I don't understand. But this all extends this database abstraction layer called Doctrine, which on its own, the layer isn't that much. I don't imagine it's that much of a revelation. How revolutionary is an abstraction layer? We do have backward compatibility with ADODB because otherwise our code would be just completely screwed. So I have rewritten some of these methods to map to their Doctrine equivalents. But where this will get us in the future is this also includes the Doctrine ORM, which is the object relational mapping tool, which is like Active Record with ADODB, but not crappy. No offense to ADODB. It is total. Yeah. We don't actually use this for anything in the core yet, but developers, I think, will really like the fact that it's there and built in, and we'll like the fact once we get around to using it that we can, just write object-oriented PHP, and it will automatically write all the database queries, including all of the, all the joins and things like that. And this will also probably let us, sunset some of the well-meaning classes that have been written over the years but have gotten a little long in the tooth, like the database item list. I'm sure there are fuller featured, implementations of a query list with pagination and stuff that is a little less, what's the right word? Like a little less idiosyncratic.
So does this impact the level of effort required for supporting a second database?
Actually,
Like an Oracle or a MySQL or
I would think not. I mean, we would probably still have to look into, any of the special queries that we actually, if we ever write, a SQL query that has its own limit function in it for its own limit column, like that will break certain other databases. But, I don't think so, and I think it will make it much more believable that we could support another database. This also lets us support stuff ADODB never could. I mean, I don't think Concrete 5 would work in this, but you can add in different connections to databases on the fly to stuff like MongoDB and things like that. We would never run Concrete 5 in that, but the ability to have that as something we can connect to, right from in there is pretty nice. Yes, that's object-oriented way of crafting a SQL query, which is kind of what database item list was supposed to be. But I mean, this takes a lot of work to make something super tight like that, and that's what they do. So
yeah, like that sort of thing. If we started using that more often,
yes,
like those limits wouldn't really matter.
Exactly.
The driver would manage.
Yes, exactly. And so, and the join syntax, all of that stuff. If we would, any of the most difficult queries, I think, to port would not be the simple page selects. It would be like the file manager stuff and all those crazy queries, permissions. But using that query builder, that would.
There'd be some.
The groundwork is there. So it is totally believable that we could support different databases much more than we could before.
Once we get through some point releases.
Yes, exactly.
Start that first 5.8.
Yes.
That makes sense to me.
Yes. There's other stuff in here. We still have a lot of third-party libraries. I'm gonna be killing ADODB soon. Sorry, ADODB. We've still got some Zend. We still use Zend for a lot of the stuff too, but we didn't go with Zend for some of this stuff because it looked just too. The Symfony stuff is extended by a lot of other libraries, and there were like this very popular PHP framework called Laravel, which basically takes some of Symfony's unwieldy syntax, although very powerful, and makes it really easy for developers to use. And we're kind of taking some of the same approaches. And so really the idea being bringing Concrete 5 into the kind of like make it as
2014.
As revolutionary in 2014 as it was in 2008.
Yeah,
because it had not been. Yeah.
Interior.
Yeah.
Sweet.
That's right. It's going to be great, and it's going to be ready for an alpha release next Friday.
I like it. Good job.
Yeah. Woo.
Yay.